What would you do if the only man who ever defended your dignity turned out to be your boss? If a pretend husband became the only person who ever truly saw you? Clara Benson never believed in fairy tales. At 33, she was a waitress in a small Oregon town, invisible to the people she served until the night she asked a stranger to pretend to be her husband, just to survive the wedding of her ex. That stranger was Ethan Cole, quiet, kind-eyed, and far from ordinary. What began as a desperate act soon spiraled into a lie too real to control a love story caught between class, pride, and the price of honesty. When the truth surfaced that Ethan owned the very restaurant where Clara worked, the illusion shattered. But somewhere between betrayal and forgiveness, between a storm in Maine and the hum of a coffee shop, they discovered something real. Love doesn't rescue you, it recognizes you. So, can a lie born from loneliness turn into the truth that saves them both? Stay with us, because this story will break your heart before it heals it. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and let's begin. The night air in Maple Creek carried the clean scent of pine and rain. It was one of those Oregon evenings when the clouds never fully emptied, when mist floated like breath over the quiet town. Behind the Silver Elm Bistro, the narrow alley hummed with the low buzz of the refrigerator vents and the soft drip of water from the roof. The world felt smaller there, wrapped in the smell of damp bread, garlic, and metal. Clara Benson leaned her shoulder against the brick wall, the cold seeping through her uniform. Her hands trembled as she held her phone close to her ear. "Maggie, please tell me I'm not crazy for feeling like this." Her friend's voice came through, gentle but firm. "You're not crazy. Clara, you're just human, but you still have to show up for the shift." Clara squeezed her eyes shut. The sound of laughter drifted faintly from the restaurant's back door music. Cutlery. A burst of cheer that belonged to other people. "I can't," she whispered. "It's his wedding dinner. Adam's wedding. And I'm the one pouring the champagne." There was a sigh on the other end of the line. "I know. Believe me, I know. But you need the money. Right, rent's due next week." Clara stared down at her sneakers, darkened by the rain. The truth hurt. Her bank account had been holding its breath for months. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I need the money." A gust of wind cut through the alley, lifting a strand of her brown hair across her face. She pushed it behind her ear and gave a short, brittle laugh. "He used to say we'd have our reception at the Silver Elm someday. Guess he kept that promise just with someone else." Maggie didn't try to offer comfort. They were too old for fairy tales. "Instead," she said, "you don't have to prove anything to him." "Tell that to the universe," Clara murmured. "It keeps sending reminders that I'm stuck exactly where I was when he left." She hung up before the silence could turn awkward. Before Maggie could say the thing neither of them wanted to hear, that sometimes love doesn't fail you, it simply outgrows you. Clara tucked the phone into her apron pocket and straightened. Her shift wasn't over. She still had tables to serve, smiles to fake. She drew a long breath, tasting rain and exhaust, then pushed through the back door into the light. Inside, warmth wrapped around her, thick with the scent of rosemary and roasted chicken. The bistro glowed with soft amber bulbs strung along wooden beams, every table dressed in crisp linen. It was the kind of cozy elegance Maple Creek's locals bragged about, upscale but still homey. To Clara, it felt like walking into someone else's life. She passed the bar, where Mark Anders, the manager, was polishing glasses with mechanical precision. "Clara," he said without looking up, "head table's yours tonight. Make sure the wine service stays smooth." Of course it was. She forced a polite nod. "Yes, sir." The music from the corner speaker shifted to an old Sinatra tune, the rhythm of nostalgia itself. She gathered a tray of champagne flutes and stepped toward the dining room. The crowd shimmered with sequins, pearls, and practiced laughter. And there under the chandelier was Adam Hayes, tall, confident, his blonde hair still falling in the same boyish curve across his forehead. On his arm, Rachel Montgomery gleamed like a brand new coin. Clara's throat tightened as if the air itself had betrayed her. He looked happy, effortlessly, unfairly happy. Her hands shook as she set down the first glass. "Congratulations?" she managed, voice steady by sheer will. Adam blinked, recognition dawning. "Clara." "Wow, I didn't." Rachel's fingers curled possessively around his arm. "Service looks lovely," she said, her smile a polite dagger. Clara's practiced grin never faltered. "Thank you, ma'am. Enjoy the evening." She moved away before the tremor in her chest showed on her face. Hours trickled by in a blur of clinking forks and laughter. She moved like clockwork refill, smile, retreat. But each time she passed the head table, the old ache pressed harder. She remembered late-night drives, shared fries, whispered dreams of buying a little house by the river. Now he was a guest in her workplace, and she was invisible except for her tray. When the band started "The Way You Look Tonight," she escaped to the service hallway, pressing her palms flat against the cool tile. She let the music fade into muffled echoes through the door. "Stop it," she told herself. "Stop letting him rent space in your head for free." But the truth was simple and cruel. She wasn't mourning Adam anymore. She was mourning the version of herself who still believed life was fair. At midnight, the last guest drifted out into the drizzle, laughter dissolving into the street. Mark handed her the night's tips in an envelope. "Good work," he said, already checking his watch. Clara nodded, exhausted. "Good night." Outside again. The rain had softened to a mist, fine as breath. She slipped into the alley, untied her apron, and exhaled. The streetlights painted halos on the puddles. The world looked blurred and distant. She leaned against the same brick wall as before. For a moment, she let herself cry, not the sobs of heartbreak, just quiet tears of fatigue, slipping down her cheeks and disappearing into the rain. Somewhere deep in the bistro, a chair scraped. She didn't notice the man still sitting in the far corner booth, the one who always left a generous tip and never asked for more than a cup of coffee. He watched her through the window, his expression unreadable. When she finally walked away into the fog, he murmured something under his breath, a name he had only seen printed on her name tag. Clara Benson. Then he finished his coffee, left a folded bill on the table, and stepped out into the night, following her name into the rain. Morning crept over Maple Creek in soft layers of silver light. The rain had stopped, but the street still glistened, mirrors of the cloudy sky above. Inside, the Silver Elm Bistro. The air smelled of brewed coffee and warm cinnamon. The dinner chaos of last night felt like a different lifetime. Clara Benson tied her apron, trying to look alive. Her eyes were red around the edges. Too many sleepless hours, too many thoughts she hadn't managed to drown. Maggie had texted 3 times. "You okay? Coffee after shift? Please eat something?" She hadn't answered yet. By 10, the breakfast crowd had thinned. That was when she noticed him again, the man from the corner booth. He sat where he always did, near the window that faced Main Street, a cup of black coffee cooling in front of him. His hair was dark with a few silver threads, his shirt rolled at the sleeves. He didn't wear a suit, just a gray sweater and a watch that looked older than he was. His posture was calm, almost still, like someone who'd learned how to listen more than he spoke. Clara grabbed the coffee pot and walked over, rehearsing her neutral smile. "Refill for you, sir." Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. He looked up, eyes a deep gray blue, the color of the ocean before a storm. "Sure," he said. "And it's Ethan." Then, after a beat, "Rough night." Clara. The sound of her name on his tongue hit like a pinprick, gentle, unexpected. Her hand froze mid-pour. She blinked, caught between embarrassment and disbelief. "You. Remember my name." He smiled a little. "It's on your tag." Then, softer. "But I pay attention." Something in the way he said it, quiet, without pity, undid her. She bit her lip, tried to keep her voice light. "Oh, right. The tag." But her throat burned. She set the pot down quickly before the shaking in her hands gave her away. Ethan tilted his head. "I saw you outside last night. he said gently. You looked like you were carrying the world on your shoulders. Her laugh came out brittle, more like my past on repeat. Bad night, the worst. She pressed her fingers to the edge of the table, grounding herself in the texture of the wood. Turns out, serving champagne to your ex at his wedding isn't great for emotional stability. Ethan's brows lifted slightly. He didn't interrupt. He just waited, eyes steady, patient in a way that made her feel safe enough to keep talking. She told him pieces of the breakup 2 years ago, the dreams that never happened, the way she kept ending up in the same small town, doing the same tired things. He listened the entire time, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup, silent but attentive. When she finally stopped, embarrassed by her own outpouring, he said quietly, "It sounds like you gave your best to someone who didn't know what to do with it. That doesn't make it wasted." Clara blinked back a sudden tear. People usually just tell me to move on. Moving on isn't the same as healing. He leaned back. You don't rush healing. You let it breathe. For a moment, neither spoke. Outside. A bus sighed at the curb, releasing passengers who hurried under umbrellas. Inside, the jazz playing through the speakers slowed into something soft, almost fragile. That silence between them, uncomfortable for most, felt almost sacred. The kind of silence that said, "I see you without the need for words." She found herself asking, "Why are you always sitting here alone?" "Ethan, you've been coming in for months." He gave a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I like quiet places, and I like watching people who haven't forgotten how to care. That sounds lonely." "It is," he admitted, "but it's honest." Clara nodded slowly. Honesty felt like a luxury she hadn't afforded herself in a long time. She poured him more coffee, though his cup was still nearly full, just to have something to do with her hands. "I'm sorry you had to hear my whole pity party," she said, forcing a lighter tone. "I promise I'm not usually this dramatic." He chuckled softly. "You were human for 5 minutes? That's not drama." Her lips twitched into a smile, small but real. Then she sighed. "Sometimes I wish I could skip town for a while. Just disappear. Come back when I've figured out how not to care." "Maybe you don't need to stop caring," he said. "Maybe you just need to start caring about the right things." Something about that line lingered, like a thread tugging at a corner of her heart. She opened her mouth to reply, but the bell over the door rang, and Mark's voice barked from behind the counter. "Clara, need you for the lunch prep." She glanced at Ethan, reluctant. "Duty 1? Guess that's me," she said softly. "Guess so." She turned to leave, but stopped. There was a courage she hadn't felt in years pushing against her ribs. A wild, impulsive courage that whispered, what if she looked back at him? "Ethan, this is going to sound insane." He arched an eyebrow. "Try me." "There's a wedding reception next weekend," she began, words tumbling faster now. "A big one. Same couple. They invited the whole town. And somehow, I ended up on the guest list because Rachel's family wants to keep things civil. And She stopped, half laughing, half mortified. "I can't go alone." He studied her face for a moment, expression unreadable. "Are you asking what I think you're asking? I need someone there, so I don't look pathetic. Someone kind, not flashy, who can stand next to me and make it look like I've moved on." Her cheeks flamed. "I can't believe I'm saying this to a customer." Ethan's mouth curved, not in mockery, but in something softer. "Let me get this straight." He set down his cup. "You're asking a man you barely know to pretend to be your husband for one night." She winced. "When you put it like that, yes. Exactly that." For a second, he said nothing. The hum of the espresso machine filled the air. Then he smiled, faintly, the kind of smile that carried warmth rather than amusement. "Sounds like you've had your fill of pretending, Clara. Are you sure you want to start another act?" Her voice trembled. "It's not an act if it helps me breathe for one night." He looked at her a long time, something unspoken passing through his gaze. Sympathy, maybe recognition. Finally, He nodded. All right. One night. She exhaled. Half relief, half terror. Thank you, she whispered. Ethan's eyes softened. You don't have to thank me yet, she smiled, more at herself than at him. Outside, the rain began again, gentle against the window. For the first time in months, Clara felt something stir inside her chest that wasn't sadness, hope, or something dangerously close to it. The late afternoon light slanted through the tall windows of the Silver Elm Bistro, spilling across the floor in thin, golden ribbons. The lunch rush had ended, leaving the place in a rare hush. The last of the coffee steam curled lazily into the air. Clara Benson stood by the counter, her heart hammering like a trapped bird. She had spent the entire shift avoiding Ethan Cole's gaze, but every time she walked past his booth, she felt the quiet gravity of his presence. Now the room was empty except for them. He sat where he always did, hands folded loosely around his mug, eyes following her in that patient, unhurried way of his. She wiped the same clean table for the third time, trying to summon the courage to speak. Her pulse drummed in her ears. What am I doing, she thought? Begging a stranger to save my pride. Clara, Ethan said finally, his voice low, breaking the silence. You look like someone who's about to talk herself out of something. She froze, then laughed under her breath. You can read minds now? Not minds, he said. Just people who think too loud. That was enough to make her walk over. Her apron strings dangled loose at her sides. She slid into the booth across from him, pulse thrumming like she'd done something forbidden. About that wedding, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. He waited, saying nothing. She stared down at her hands, twisting the napkin between her fingers. I know it's crazy. I mean, really crazy. Asking someone I barely know to pretend to be my husband. She laughed nervously. Who does that? Ethan's mouth quirked. Apparently, you. That startled a real smile from her. It softened her face, made her look younger, lighter. I can't face them alone, she said quietly. Everyone in that room will know I lost. Adam got the perfect life, the perfect wife, and I'll just be me. Her voice caught, and she looked away. You don't owe me anything. You don't even know me. But if you could just come with me just one night, it would make things a little less humiliating. The silence that followed stretched long enough to make her regret every word. Ethan's gaze lowered to his coffee, then lifted to meet hers. His eyes held no judgment, just thoughtfulness, and something else she couldn't quite name. Finally, he said, you don't strike me as someone who needs saving. Clara. Her heart stuttered. Then what do I look like to you? He studied her face, every trace of exhaustion and quiet fire in it. Like someone who's been holding herself together for too long. The words landed in her chest like a touch. She swallowed hard, her throat tight. You're kind, she murmured, but kindness doesn't get people to weddings. He smiled faintly, that half smile of his that felt equal parts amusement and sadness. No, it doesn't. He leaned back, arms crossed loosely. Still. I'll go. Her head snapped up. You will. He nodded. You said it's next Saturday. Yes, at the Montgomery estate. He winced softly. The Vineyard people. She laughed, surprised. You know them, not personally. But in my experience, people with that much money usually make every event feel like a power play. She nodded grimly. You're not wrong. He reached for his coffee again, his tone lighter now. All right then, I'll be your husband for one night. What's the dress code for this? Performance? Clara blinked at him, half laughing, half overwhelmed. Formal, very formal, and maybe bring a good poker face. I think I can manage that, he said, eyes glinting. Her relief came out as a shaky laugh. I can't believe you're actually saying yes. Neither can I, he admitted softly. But here we are. The quiet settled between them again. comfortable this time. For a long moment, they just sat there, two people caught in the strange calm that follows an impossible decision. Clara's chest felt lighter, though her mind spun in circles. He's doing me a favor, she told herself. That's all. But somewhere underneath that rational thought was a flicker of something dangerously close to anticipation. She met his gaze again and saw something steady there, something that made her forget, just for a moment, how broken she'd felt last night. Why she asked finally, "Why would you help me?" Ethan looked out the window, where the clouds were breaking, strips of sunlight spilling across the street. "Maybe," he said, "because it's been a long time since anyone's asked me to matter." Her breath caught. There was pain in that answer, quiet, honest pain, and it humbled her. She wanted to ask more, to peel back the layers of this man who seemed to carry his own ghosts. But before she could, Mark's voice called from the kitchen. "Clara, you're off the clock. Go home before I find you something else to do." She stood reluctantly. "I guess that's my cue." Ethan rose too, pulling a few bills from his wallet and leaving them under his saucer. "Next Saturday, then," he said, his tone almost teasing. "You pick the time, Mrs. Benson." She flushed, her heart stumbling at the word. "Careful," she said with a nervous smile. "You make it sound real." He gave a small nod. "Maybe that's the trick." They walked toward the door together. The late light painted his features gold, highlighting the faint lines near his eyes. Outside, the wind carried the smell of rain and distant pine. At the door, she hesitated. "Ethan," she said quietly, "I don't know how to thank you." He looked at her for a long moment. "You just did." She smiled, and for a second, neither of them moved. When she finally turned to go, Ethan watched her cross the street, her reflection rippling in the puddles. He thought of her words, her trembling voice, her unguarded eyes. Maybe this woman doesn't need saving, he thought. Maybe she just needs to be seen. Saturday arrived with a sky so clear it almost felt like mockery. The sun washed Maple Creek in honey-colored light, glinting off wet pavement and polished car hoods. From her small apartment window, Clara Benson could see the town already waking, shop signs flickering on, kids on bicycles cutting through puddles, the world moving as if nothing monumental was about to happen. Her heart, however, didn't agree. She stood in front of the mirror, smoothing the navy blue dress she'd borrowed from Maggie. It was simple but elegant, the kind of dress that whispered confidence even when the wearer didn't feel it. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her hair. She had done her makeup 3 times already, too much, too little, just right, and still didn't recognize the woman staring back at her. "What are you doing?" "Clara," the thought had haunted her all morning. "You begged a stranger to play pretend. What kind of desperate person does that?" And yet, beneath the anxiety, a strange thrill hummed through her veins. For the first time in years, she wasn't running from her past. She was walking straight into it. The knock came at exactly noon. 3 soft, confident taps. Her pulse stuttered. She crossed the room and opened the door. Ethan Cole stood in the hallway, framed by sunlight, and for a moment, she forgot how to breathe. Gone was the quiet man in the gray sweater and rolled-up sleeves. In his place stood someone cut from a different world. His suit was deep charcoal, tailored to perfection, the fabric catching light like liquid smoke. The crisp white of his shirt gleamed against his skin. A black tie lay perfectly knotted at his collar and on his wrist. A sleek watch ticked with understated precision. He looked powerful, impossibly composed, like someone who belonged to boardrooms and headlines, not bistro corners. Clara blinked. "You," her voice cracked. "You clean up well." His lips curved into that familiar, understated smile. "The role of husband," he said softly, "has a certain dress code." Her laugh came out breathless. "I'll say." He extended his arm, formal, almost playful. "Shall we, Mrs. Cole?" The name made her stomach flutter. She slipped her hand into the crook of his arm, the warmth of him bleeding through fine wool. "You're really leaning into this," she murmured. "Authenticity is important," he replied. "Besides," his tone softened, "you deserve someone who looks at least halfway worthy of standing next to you today." The words caught her off guard. She didn't answer, afraid her voice might betray her. As they descended the stairs, she caught their reflection in the glass door, him, tall and composed, her, nervous but radiant in her own fragile way. For a fleeting second, they looked like they belonged together. Outside, a sleek black sedan waited at the curb. Clara stopped short. "This is yours," she asked, wide-eyed. Ethan hesitated a beat before nodding. "Yes. I thought it would make a better entrance." It was subtle, but something in the way he said mine stirred curiosity. The car gleamed with quiet luxury, the kind that didn't shout wealth, it whispered it. As he held the door open for her, she caught the faint scent of his cologne, clean, understated, with a trace of cedar and rain. It made her head spin. The drive was quiet. Maple Creek's roads wound through hills and vineyards, sunlight slipping through the trees like gold dust. She found herself stealing glances at him, wondering how someone could change so completely with a suit and a smile. "You don't do this often," she said finally. He glanced at her, one eyebrow lifting. "Pretend to be someone's husband," she smiled faintly. "Show up looking like you just stepped out of a movie." He chuckled under his breath. "Let's just say, it's been a while since I played dress-up." Something in his tone, a hint of irony. Maybe sadness made her glance at him again. His profile was calm, but the set of his jaw betrayed tension. "You really don't have to do this." "Ethan," she said softly, "if it feels like too much, I said I would." He interrupted gently, "And I keep my word." The firmness in his tone silenced her doubts, but it also deepened her curiosity. Who was this man? Really? They turned off the main road toward the Montgomery estate, the sprawling vineyard that seemed to stretch forever. Rows of grapevines rolled over the hills, green and gold under the afternoon sun. The mansion at the top shimmered like something out of a dream or a warning. Clara's stomach knotted. "They'll all be there," she murmured. "Adam, his family, Rachel's parents, the whole perfect world I never belonged to." Ethan slowed the car, his hand steady on the wheel. "Then, it's time you stop standing outside it, looking in." She looked at him, startled. He didn't glance back, just smiled faintly as he turned up the long gravel drive. The mansion loomed ahead, its marble columns gleaming white against the sky. Music drifted down the hill strings and laughter and the clink of crystal. A valet stepped forward as Ethan parked, and when he stepped out, the change in the air was immediate. Heads turned, he straightened his jacket, then rounded the car to open Clara's door. When she stepped out, the whispers started curious, approving, speculative. He offered her his hand. "Ready?" He asked, voice low. "No," she admitted, "but thank you for pretending I am." Their eyes met hers full of nerves, his calm, unreadable. Then, with the faintest nod, he placed his hand at the small of her back, guiding her toward the crowd. The touch was light, but steady, anchoring her in the storm of her own heartbeat. Every step up the marble staircase felt surreal. The string quartet swelled, champagne glasses shimmered. She could feel eyes on them, the silent buzz of curiosity. Adam Hayes turned at the sound of their arrival. For a moment, time stopped. His expression flickered from surprise to disbelief to something sharper. Clara lifted her chin, her fingers tightening on Ethan's arm. Ethan leaned closer, his voice a whisper near her ear. "You're doing fine, Mrs. Cole." The words steadied her. Inside, chandeliers blazed, laughter rose, and the illusion began. No one would ever guess that the elegant man at her side, the one whose presence filled the room with quiet authority, wasn't her husband at all. And Clara couldn't shake the strange, unnerving thought that maybe she was the one pretending less than she'd thought. The ballroom of the Harrington Hotel in downtown Portland shimmered under crystal chandeliers. Gold light spilled across the marble floors, where laughter mingled with the faint notes of a string quartet, The scent of roses and champagne filled the air, elegant, polished, suffocating. Clara Benson stood near the edge of it all, clutching a glass she hadn't touched. Her dress caught the light just enough to make her feel seen, though part of her wished she could vanish into the wallpaper. Then Ethan Cole appeared beside her, calm, composed, a living contrast to her quiet nerves. His suit still looked impossibly sharp, his hair perfectly in place, but it was his presence that changed the air around him. Wherever he walked, people straightened their shoulders, lowered their voices. He carried authority without needing to prove it. When he reached her side, he leaned slightly closer. "Smile," he whispered. "People are watching." "I'm trying," she murmured, lips barely moving. "It's just surreal." "Good," he said softly. "Let's make it look effortless." He took her glass and replaced it with another champagne, crisp and pale gold. Then, without warning, he slipped his hand gently into hers, guiding her toward the center of the room. A murmur rippled through the guests. Heads turned. Clara could feel it, the curiosity, the quick glances, the whisper of admiration. To them, they must have looked like a picture of ease, a poised man, and his beautiful wife arriving fashionably late, perfectly matched. "Mr. and Mrs. Cole," announced one of the event hosts, smiling warmly. "We're so glad you could make it." Ethan nodded, charm sliding into place like a well-tailored coat. "We wouldn't miss it," he replied, his voice even and polished. His hand at the small of Clara's back felt steady, protective. Clara smiled real this time. For a moment, she forgot the reason she was there. She forgot the ache of Adam's betrayal, the years she'd spent shrinking to fit inside her pain. Standing beside Ethan, she didn't feel small. She felt seen. It wasn't until she caught Adam's eyes across the room that the illusion cracked. He stood near the bar, glass in hand, mid-conversation until he saw her. His expression faltered. The easy grin he wore for the crowd disappeared, replaced by something tighter. Rachel Montgomery, radiant in her silk gown, followed his gaze. Her hand tightened on his arm. "Clara," Adam said finally, his voice warm but unsteady as he crossed the floor. "You look wow. It's been a long time." Clara's smile stayed fixed. 2 years, she said evenly. "Feels like a lifetime." Adam's eyes flicked toward Ethan. "And you are?" Ethan extended his hand smoothly. "Ethan Cole." He waited half a beat, then added, "Clara's husband." The word landed like a dropped coin in a silent room. Adam blinked, caught off guard. "Husband," he repeated, his tone too casual. "Well, congratulations." "I didn't realize it wasn't public," Ethan said, polite but firm. "We like to keep things simple." Rachel shifted beside Adam, forcing a bright smile. "That's lovely. Simplicity is underrated. Don't you think?" Ethan's eyes softened toward Clara. "It's one of her best qualities," he said quietly. The words, simple as they were, made Clara's chest tighten. The way he said it low, deliberate, like he meant it, sent a ripple of warmth through her that she didn't expect. Adam cleared his throat, glancing between them. "Well, I'm glad you're doing well." "Clara, really?" She nodded. "I am." Rachel tugged his arm gently. "Come on, darling." They're about to start the first dance. As they turned away, Clara felt the tremor in her own breath, the urge to laugh, cry, and flee all tangled together. Ethan leaned close. "You handled that beautifully." "Did I?" she whispered, voice shaking. "Better than he did." That made her smile again, shaky but genuine. "I almost believed myself for a second," she said. He glanced down at her. "Maybe you should." The band shifted into a slow jazz tune, couples drifting onto the dance floor. A spotlight swept lazily over sequins and tuxedos. Without a word, Ethan offered his hand. Her eyes widened. "You dance, I survive," he said, lips curving slightly. "Come on." She hesitated only a heartbeat before placing her hand in his. His palm was warm, steady. The moment he drew her close, The room seemed to soften around them, voices fading, lights blurring. He guided her easily, his movements smooth, deliberate. She tried to focus on the rhythm, on keeping her steps light, but her heartbeat refused to stay in time. Relax, he murmured near her ear. You're safe. It wasn't the words themselves that undid her. It was the certainty in his tone. Like he meant it beyond the dance, beyond the room, beyond the pretense. She lifted her eyes to his. For a second, she forgot the guests, the chandeliers, the reason for this act. His gaze held hers steady, searching. Something unspoken moving behind it. The music slowed. His hand traced a careful line down her back, then stilled at her waist. The world narrowed to the sound of their breathing. "Ethan," she whispered. He looked down at her, voice almost a whisper himself. "Don't overthink it." "Overthink what this," he said simply, eyes not leaving hers. Her heart tripped. She wasn't sure what this was, the dance, the lie, or the feeling rising uninvited inside her chest. When the song ended, they didn't step apart right away. A murmur of applause rippled through the room, and only then did Ethan release her hand, the touch lingering for a fraction too long. He turned to the crowd, perfectly composed again, while she stood beside him, pulse unsteady, trying to remember where the act ended and the truth began. From across the room, Adam watched, jaw tight, eyes dark. Rachel leaned toward him, whispering something that went unanswered. Clara caught the look, the jealousy that flickered behind Adam's practiced smile, and for the first time since the night began, she didn't feel small. She felt powerful, but that power came with something else, confusion. Because when Ethan looked down at her again, his eyes weren't pretending anymore, and neither were hers. The party was in full bloom. Laughter clinked against crystal glasses. The string quartet wove golden threads of melody through the crowd, and waiters glided by with trays of canapes and wine. To everyone else, it was just another celebration. To Clara Benson, it felt like a fever dream she couldn't wake from. She stood with Ethan near the tall French doors that opened onto the terrace. The scent of lavender and champagne hung in the air. They had played their parts flawlessly, smiling, dancing, exchanging glances that were almost too convincing. But now, as she tried to steady her breath, she felt something unnameable stirring beneath the surface. The lie had grown roots. "Are you all right?" Ethan asked quietly, his tone threaded with concern. Clara nodded too quickly. "Just warm in here," she said, even though goosebumps prickled her arms. He looked at her for a moment longer, as if seeing more than she wanted him to. Then, before he could reply, a man's voice interrupted. Well, Ethan Cole, I'll be damned." The voice carried from behind them, smooth, surprised, half laughing. Clara turned, confused, as a tall man in a tailored tuxedo approached, hand outstretched. "Didn't expect to see you here," the man said. "It's been years since the hospitality conference in Seattle. Still running the empire?" I assume Ethan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Harold," he said politely, shaking the man's hand. "It's been a while." The name Ethan Cole rolled through the air, casual but heavy. A few nearby guests turned their heads. Whispers followed, familiar, reverent. Clara blinked. The words hung there like thunder waiting to break. Ethan Cole. Cole Hospitality Group. She had heard that name before. Everyone at the Silver Elm Bistro had. It was printed on their employee manuals, embossed on the staff aprons, stamped into every paycheck. Her heart stumbled. "Cole," she repeated under her breath. Harold grinned, oblivious to the storm forming beside him. "Still impossible to get a reservation at one of your places. I bet the Silver Elm one of yours, too. Isn't it?" Clara's breath caught. The room tilted slightly. Her gaze snapped to Ethan. He didn't deny it. He didn't say a word. Her voice came out thin, almost trembling. "You own it," Ethan exhaled slowly, eyes closing for a second as if bracing himself. When he looked at her again, There was regret in every line of his face. "Yes," he said quietly, "I do." The noise of the ballroom faded into a dull hum. Clara's pulse roared in her ears. "You're my boss," she whispered, disbelief cracking through the words. "You sat there in that booth for months, listening to me talk about work, about customers, about—" She swallowed hard. "About you. And you never said a word." Ethan's expression softened. "Clara." "No," she cut in, her voice shaking. "You let me beg you to come tonight. You let me think the rest broke off. The truth was too big, too raw to name." Around them, the world carried on music, laughter, the clink of silverware, but to Clara, it all sounded far away, like echoes from underwater. She took a step back. "Why didn't you tell me I wanted you to see me?" he said simply. "Not the company, not the name." She laughed once, hollow. "Congratulations. You got your wish. I saw you as a man who understood me, not someone who signed my paycheck." He flinched at her tone. "It wasn't meant to deceive you. Then what would you call it?" He hesitated. "A mistake," he said finally. "One I didn't know how to fix once it started." Clara shook her head, the movement sharp, disbelieving, the chandeliers blurred. She could feel her heart pounding against her ribs, each beat heavier than the last. She turned toward the terrace, pushing through the glass doors and into the cool night air. The noise inside muffled behind her, replaced by the sound of wind through the vines below the hill. Ethan followed, stopping a few feet away. "Clara, please." She didn't look at him. "You could have told me. You had so many chances." "I know." "Then why didn't you?" He was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, rough. "Because when you looked at me, you didn't see a CEO. You saw a man. And for the first time in years, I didn't want to correct you." The confession hung there between them, fragile as glass. She turned to face him, anger flickering beneath her hurt. "You think that makes it better?" "No," he said softly. "It just makes it real." They stood there, motionless, the night pressing close around them. Somewhere below, the faint music drifted out a waltz in a minor key. Clara's voice dropped, barely audible. "You sat in that booth, watching me struggle to pay rent, to survive, and you what?" Thought it was poetic. Ethan's expression tightened. "No, I thought it was brave. I saw someone fighting her life with dignity, and I envied that." Her throat constricted, tears threatened, but she refused to let them fall. "You should go back inside," she said finally. "Your colleagues are waiting." He stepped forward once, then stopped. "Clara, I didn't come here tonight to embarrass you. I came because you asked me to. And because somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling like pretending." She shook her head, her voice trembling. "You say that now, but everything between us was a lie. It wasn't." His tone deepened. "The name? Yes. The moments? No." A long silence stretched between them. The wind tugged at the hem of her dress. Inside, laughter rose again, a cruel reminder of the world they didn't belong to. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but soft, like someone too tired to stay angry. "You should have trusted me enough to tell me who you were." He lowered his eyes. "You're right." She turned away, arms wrapped around herself. "Then it's a little late for honesty now." He didn't try to stop her when she walked past him, back into the light and noise of the ballroom. He just stood there on the terrace, the sound of distant music filling the hollow space she left behind. Inside, Clara moved through the crowd like a ghost, hearing her own name somewhere in the mix of laughter and gossip, realizing that every polite smile aimed her way was now laced with curiosity. Her hands shook as she reached for a glass of water, her reflection caught in the mirror across the room, a woman standing beside a stranger she thought she knew. For the first time that night, the mask felt too heavy to wear. Morning crept into Maple Creek like an apology, gray light spilling through thin curtains, soft rain tapping against the windows. Clara Benson sat at her kitchen table, staring at the blank email on her laptop screen. Subject line, resignation, effective immediately. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She'd rewritten it 3 times, but every version came out sounding the same: small, defeated. Dear management, thank you for the opportunity. She hated the way those words tasted. Her stomach twisted as she pictured the name embossed on her apron, the name she could no longer see without flinching: Cole Hospitality Group. The betrayal still burned fresh. Ethan Cole, her mysterious customer. Her fake husband for one night had turned out to be the man who owned the restaurant she'd worked at for 6 years. The man who held the keys to her entire livelihood. She shut the laptop with a soft click and pressed her palms to her eyes. "That's it," she whispered to the empty room. "I'm done." The doorbell rang. Clara froze. No one came by this early. The rain had barely stopped. She hesitated, heart thudding, then rose slowly, every step heavier than the last. When she opened the door, he was standing there, Ethan in jeans, a dark sweater, and that impossible calm that somehow made everything worse. In his hands, a cardboard tray with 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Morning," he said quietly. Clara's first instinct was to shut the door. Her hand twitched toward the handle. "You shouldn't be here," she said, voice tight. "I know." He offered the tray like a peace flag. "Truce." She stared at the cups. The scent of roasted beans filled the air, her favorite blend. Medium roast with a hint of caramel. "You remembered," she said, almost in spite of herself. "I remember everything," he replied softly. She took the coffee without meeting his eyes. "What do you want?" "Ethan." He stepped inside when she didn't stop him, his presence filling the small apartment. The space suddenly felt too intimate, the clink of mugs, the rain, the quiet between them. He set his own cup down on the counter. "I came to apologize. Properly? This time?" "I don't want your apology," she said flatly. "I just want to move on. I can't blame you," he said. "If I were you, I'd hate me too." "Good," she said. "That makes 2 of us." A silence fell long, fragile. The only sound was the faint hum of her refrigerator. Finally, he exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. "Then, let me at least make things right." Clara crossed her arms. "And how do you plan to do that? A promotion, a bonus check to smooth things over." He met her gaze evenly. "An offer." She laughed once. "Bitter?" "Of course." He didn't smile. "My parents are hosting their anniversary celebration next weekend. It's a big deal. The kind of event where every conversation is a transaction and every smile has a price tag. And this concerns me because my mother has made it her personal mission to marry me off to the daughter of one of her business partners." He paused. "She doesn't take no easily." Clara arched an eyebrow. "So, you want me to play decoy?" "Exactly that." She blinked. "You can't be serious." "I am," he said. "Come with me. Pretend to be my wife for 1 weekend. I'll handle everything, the travel, the clothes, the hotel." He hesitated, then added quietly, "And I'll pay you enough to cover your mother's medical bills and the tuition debt you've been drowning under." The words hit her like a physical blow. She stared at him, stunned. "How do you—" He looked guilty. "I read your employment record after the wedding night. I know I shouldn't have, but I needed to understand what I'd risked for my own stupidity." Clara's throat tightened. "You think money fixes everything?" "No," he said gently, "but honesty does. And I'm trying both." Her hands clenched at her sides. She wanted to throw him out, to tell him she wasn't some prop he could buy to solve his problems. But his voice, quiet, stripped of the arrogance she'd imagined, stopped her. He wasn't offering from power. He was asking from guilt. She turned away, walking toward the window. Outside, the street glistened under fading rain. "Why me?" she asked finally. He hesitated before answering. "Because you're the only person who's ever looked at me like I was human." That silenced her. He took a small step closer. "You don't have to forgive me. You don't even have to like me. But I can't face that weekend with a room full of people who see me as a headline. Not again. She turned, eyes searching his. And what do you see me as? Ethan, he held her gaze. The only one who called me a man before she knew I was one. Her heart thudded painfully. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, she let out a shaky breath. You really know how to make insanity sound logical. You know that. A faint smile touched his lips. Is that a yes? It's a maybe, she said, picking up her coffee again. If I say yes, I'm not doing it for your mother or your company. I'm doing it because maybe I want to see how far this ridiculous story can go. I'll take maybe, he said quietly. She met his gaze, eyes narrowing. But if you ever lie to me again, Ethan, about anything I walk. Fair, he said, nodding solemnly. No more lies. Clara looked down at the coffee in her hand, still warm, still perfect. When do we leave? He smiled small, grateful, almost relieved. Friday morning. We'll drive. She nodded once. Then I guess I should start packing for my next mistake. He chuckled softly. Let's hope it's the kind that turns into a good story someday. She looked up, one eyebrow raised. You really think that's possible, I think, he said, voice low, that sometimes the worst decisions lead us exactly where we need to be. Clara didn't answer. She just sipped her coffee, the taste bitter-sweet, like everything about him. And for the first time since the wedding night, she didn't know whether to feel angry, afraid, or curious. The next few evenings became a strange sort of rehearsal. Ethan would arrive at Clara's apartment just after sunset, always with a bag of groceries or takeout, insisting that no good marriage starts on an empty stomach. She would roll her eyes, but she always let him in. It began as a performance. They practiced answers to imaginary questions. How did you two meet? What's your song? What does she cook best? But somewhere between the questions and the laughter, the pretending began to blur. That first night, they sat at her small kitchen counter, surrounded by the smell of coffee and rain. Ethan flipped through a notepad filled with scenarios. Okay, he said, tone mock serious. Your turn to ask me something. Make it convincing. Clara tapped her chin, pretending to think, all right, Mr. Cole, what's your favorite movie? He smiled faintly. Casablanca, classic, a little sad, beautiful in its imperfection. She raised an eyebrow. You really are old-fashioned. Guilty, he said. Your turn. Favorite movie, she repeated. Easy. You've Got Mail. That tracks. She laughed softly. What's that supposed to mean? You run on caffeine and quiet sarcasm. It's basically your autobiography. Clara tried to hide her smile behind her mug. You're not entirely wrong. For a moment, silence filled the space, the comfortable kind that hums between two people who are beginning to relax around each other. The rain pattered softly against the window, rhythmic and steady. He took a sip of his coffee, then looked at her. You always make it the same way. 2 spoons of sugar, splash of cream. You've been paying attention. I've been noticing, he said simply. The words lingered in the air like the aroma of freshly ground beans, quiet, intimate, undeniable. Later that week, they started practicing their shared history. Ethan brought his laptop, typing notes like a man building a business plan. Let's say we met at a coffee shop, he suggested. Accidental bump, spilled drink, instant connection. That's way too cliché, Clara protested. He tilted his head. Clichés exist because they work. She laughed. Fine. But it wasn't love at first sight. I thought you were arrogant. He grinned. That sounds plausible. As they built their fake story, real details began to slip in, things they hadn't meant to share. He learned that Clara's mother had been a school librarian, the one who taught her to love books before Alzheimer's stole her memories. She learned that Ethan's father was ill, his mother relentless, a woman who measured worth in lineage and reputation, not kindness. One night, after a long pause, he said quietly, It's strange. You'd think having everything would make you feel full, but it doesn't. It just makes the emptiness louder. Clara looked at him, really looked, and saw the faint exhaustion beneath the polish, the loneliness hidden behind control. "You don't have to keep pretending with me," she said softly. He smiled without humor. "Funny." "That's exactly what I told you." The silence that followed was deep and fragile. Then, without speaking, she reached across the counter and touched his hand, just a brush of fingertips. Fleeting, but real. It wasn't romantic. Not yet. It was human. And it was enough. After that, their rehearsals shifted. They still practiced, but now it was laughter and late-night stories, quiet confessions, burnt popcorn, and reruns of black and white films. One evening, the old DVD player in Clara's living room flickered to life with "It Happened One Night." They sat cross-legged on the floor, sharing a bowl of popcorn between them. Halfway through, she teased him. "You're actually enjoying this, aren't you?" He shrugged, eyes still on the screen. "Maybe I'm just studying the art of pretending, or maybe you're learning how to stop." He turned then, his gaze catching hers. The light from the TV flickered across his face, blue, gold, then shadow. His expression softened. Maybe. They didn't talk for a long time after that. The movie kept playing, but their thoughts were elsewhere. At one point, she reached for the bowl, and her hand brushed his again. Neither of them moved. His voice was barely above a whisper. "We should keep practicing that." She smiled, eyes still on the screen. "Which part?" "The part where it feels real." The clock ticked past midnight before he finally stood to leave. He lingered by the door, the air between them thick with something unspoken. "I'll pick you up tomorrow," he said. "For more pretending, for more coffee," he corrected gently. When he left, Clara leaned against the door, her pulse still fluttering from the warmth of his voice. The next evening, he showed up with 2 bags of coffee beans and a small espresso machine. "I thought we should upgrade the training environment," he said, grinning. They spent the evening experimenting with roasts and brewing styles. She taught him how to measure by feel a little more sugar here, a slower pour there. He, in turn, showed her how to read flavor notes like a sommelier. When their hands brushed over the coffee scoop, the moment stretched thin. The smell of roasted beans filled the air, nutty, warm, familiar. Their eyes met, and neither looked away. It was a simple, wordless second, but it carried the weight of everything they hadn't said. Ethan broke the silence first, his voice low, almost reverent. "You ever think about what you'd do if you weren't at the Silver Elm?" "All the time," Clara said. "I want to open a place of my own, small, quiet, books, coffee, maybe a cat or two, a corner where people could just breathe." He smiled the first real, unguarded smile she'd seen from him. "That sounds like a place I'd never want to leave." "You'd get bored," she said. He shook his head. "Not a chance." And for a brief, precious moment, Clara believed him. That night, after he'd gone, she stood at her window watching the rain start again. The city shimmered below streetlights reflected in puddles, 1,000 tiny mirrors of something she didn't dare name. The pretending was supposed to be practice. So, why did it feel more like remembering something she'd been waiting for all along? Windmere Estate stood on the cliffs of coastal Maine, like something carved from wind and salt white stone walls. Tall columns, a view that made the ocean look endless. It was beautiful, yes, but in the same way a cathedral is beautiful cold, imposing, and built to remind anyone who entered that they didn't belong. Clara sat in the passenger seat of Ethan's sleek black sedan, hands folded tightly in her lap as the iron gates opened ahead of them. The Cole family crest gleamed in gold on the gate, a lion wrapped around a laurel. Strength through heritage. She exhaled, slow and shaky. "Your family has a thing for drama, don't they?" Ethan smiled faintly. "You have no idea." The drive wound through a tunnel of old oaks before opening to a circular courtyard where staff were already waiting: valets, gardeners, a butler with posture as straight as the marble steps. When Clara stepped out, the sea breeze hit her face sharp, briny, laced with the cry of gulls. Her blue dress fluttered in the wind, a shade lighter than the stormy sky. She felt small again, the way she had at Adam's wedding, an outsider looking into someone else's world. Then Ethan offered his arm. "Ready, Mrs. Cole?" She hesitated, then took it. "Only if you promise not to let me drown in there." He smiled softly. "Never." The doors opened with a low groan, revealing a grand foyer the size of her entire apartment building. A chandelier of glass petals hung above them, scattering fractured light across the marble. "Ethan!" came a voice from the top of the sweeping staircase. Margaret Cole descended like a queen entering court, silver hair swept back, pearls glowing against her cream dress. Her gaze was sharp enough to slice through silk. "Mother?" Ethan greeted, his tone even but cautious. "You look well." "I am," she replied smoothly, before turning her eyes toward Clara. "And this must be—" "Clara," he said. "My wife." Margaret's expression didn't flicker, but something tightened at the corners of her mouth. "How unexpected." Clara smiled politely. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Cole." "Margaret will do," she said. The words cool, brittle. "Come, dinner's ready. I imagine you've both had a long drive." As they followed her down the hall, Clara caught glimpses of old portraits, generations of Coles staring down in oil and gilt, every man stern, every woman delicate and distant. The house smelled faintly of polished wood and something floral, but faintly medicinal. Dinner was served in a dining room longer than a train car, the table a glossy river of mahogany that could seat 20. Tonight, there were 6: Ethan, Clara, Margaret, and a few of her chosen guests, old money family friends who wore politeness like armor. Conversation began, light business, art, politics, all topics designed to make Clara feel peripheral. "So, Clara," Margaret said at last, her tone honeyed but laced with barbs. "Ethan tells me you worked at one of our properties. How quaint. Did you meet while you were serving?" The table went still. Clara felt the heat rise in her cheeks but kept her voice steady. "We did," she said, though I'd say it was less about serving and more about surviving a busy night shift. A few guests chuckled softly. Margaret's eyes narrowed, a queen challenged. Ethan spoke before his mother could retort. "Clara's being modest. She's one of the reasons the Silver Elm runs as well as it does." Margaret smiled, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "How lovely. My son has always admired industrious women." Clara caught Ethan's hand beneath the table. Just a light touch, a silent, "Don't rise to it." He squeezed back. "I've got you." Margaret's friend, a man with silver cufflinks and the smug confidence of wealth, leaned forward. "So, Clara, what line of work are you in now?" "I'm still at the bistro," she said calmly. "For now?" "For now," Margaret echoed. Clara lifted her chin. "I have plans. Someday. I'd like to open a bookstore cafe, a place where people could slow down, drink something warm, read something that matters." The table fell quiet. Margaret gave a thin, incredulous smile. How charmingly small scale. Ethan's jaw flexed. Dreams don't need to be large to be significant. "Mother?" Margaret's eyes flicked to him, her tone deceptively soft. "Perhaps not dear, but some people are better suited to dreams than to reality." That was the moment the air snapped tight. Ethan set his fork down with deliberate calm. "I think Clara's reality is far more impressive than most people's illusions of grandeur." His voice was low, but it carried controlled, unwavering. The room went utterly still. Margaret blinked once, clearly not used to being challenged. Then she smiled again. That cold, perfect smile of hers. "Of course, darling. You always did have unconventional tastes. Maybe that's what keeps me human," he said quietly. Their eyes met a silent war disguised as dinner conversation. Later, When the plates were cleared and the guests drifted toward the lounge for brandy and piano music, Clara slipped out onto the terrace. The night air was cold against her flushed skin. Below, the ocean crashed against the rocks steady, endless, free. She heard the door open behind her. Ethan's voice came softly. "You held your own back there?" She let out a shaky laugh. "Barely. I thought your mother was going to have me escorted off the property." He moved beside her, hands in his pockets. "She's difficult." "She's terrifying," Clara corrected. He smiled faintly. "And yet, you didn't flinch." Clara looked out at the sea. "I've spent my whole life trying to prove I belong somewhere. Maybe tonight I stopped caring whether I do." He turned toward her, studying her face in the silver light. "That's the bravest thing I've ever heard." Their eyes met, and for a long, fragile second, there was no pretense, no game, no performance, just the quiet understanding of two people who had spent too long pretending. Then, softly, she said, "You really meant it, didn't you? Back at dinner, defending me like that?" "I meant every word," he said. She smiled, faint but real. "That might have been the first honest thing you've ever said to me." He stepped closer, his voice barely above the wind. "Then let it be the start of more." Inside, Margaret Cole watched them from behind the glass doors, her son and the waitress, silhouetted by the moonlight. She turned to the butler beside her, her voice low and cool. Find out everything about her. Outside, unaware of the storm she had just stirred, Clara lifted her gaze to the stars. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like the help. She felt like the beginning of a story she hadn't dared to believe she could live. The second night at Windmere was worse than the first. Dinner had begun as polite conversation and careful smiles, but beneath the crystal chandeliers, the air carried something sharp, the kind of tension that made even laughter sound rehearsed. Clara Benson sat beside Ethan, aware of every glance, every whisper that skimmed her name like a judgment. She had survived 100 dinners in her life, but none like this where every forkful of silence tasted like disapproval. Margaret Cole presided over the table like a monarch. Her voice was elegant, smooth, and merciless. "So, Clara," she said lightly, "I hear you're quite the expert on coffee. How fascinating. My staff tell me you even taught them how to steam milk properly." Clara smiled faintly. "Choosing grace over defense? I try to do what I love well. Mrs. Cole?" "Oh, of course." Margaret's lips curved, razor thin. "Though I imagine the art of service comes naturally to someone, in your line of work." The words landed like ice water. Several guests looked down at their plates. One man cleared his throat, trying to diffuse the silence, but Margaret wasn't finished. "It's admirable, really," she continued, "how someone can climb above their beginnings." Ethan's fork froze midair. "Mother," he said quietly, "that's enough." She ignored him. "Though one wonders," she mused, eyes glittering, "how long such a climb can last before gravity does its work." That did it. Ethan stood, chair scraping loudly against marble. "I said that's enough." The table fell into stunned silence. Margaret blinked, feigning surprise. "Ethan, darling, it was just conversation." "No," he said sharply. "It was cruelty dressed in manners. And I'm done pretending not to hear it." Without another word, he reached for Clara's hand and pulled her to her feet. "Ethan," she whispered, mortified, but he didn't let go. "We're leaving." The guests watched in stunned fascination as he led her out of the dining room, past the hall of portraits, through the glass doors, and into the night. Outside, the garden lay silver under the moon. The ocean wind carried the scent of roses and salt. The grass was damp beneath their feet. The world hushed except for the pounding of her heart. Clara stopped when they reached the fountain, breathless, humiliated, angry. "Ethan, what are you doing?" You just stormed out of your mother's dinner. He turned to her, eyes fierce, voice low. I couldn't sit there and watch her tear you apart. I didn't need saving, she said, chest heaving. I needed respect. You had it. From me. She looked away, her throat tight. You just made it worse. Now they'll think I'm the girl who made the golden son lose his temper. Ethan stepped closer, his tone softer now. Let them... You don't owe them your composure. She shook her head. You don't understand. I've spent my whole life trying to prove I belong in rooms like that. Around people like them. He took another step, his eyes steady on hers, then stopped proving it. Her breath caught. What you don't have to prove your worth to anyone. Clara, he said, his voice a quiet storm. Not to them, not to me, not anymore. The words hit her like a tremor, gentle, devastating, true. For a long, suspended second, neither moved. The air between them was charged the kind of silence that comes right before lightning. Clara tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Ethan, he looked at her, and everything restrained in him, the guilt, the control, the impossible tenderness, cracked open. Then, without warning, he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a polite, practiced kiss. It wasn't a performance. It was raw, sudden, alive, a breaking of everything they had agreed not to feel. Her hands went to his chest in reflex, not to push him away, but to hold on. The world around them blurred the sound of the sea. The lights from the house, the cold marble fountain all vanished beneath the thunder of that single, reckless moment. When they finally broke apart, the air between them was shaking with what neither dared to say. Clara's voice came out in a whisper, trembling. This was supposed to be pretend. Ethan's forehead rested against hers, breath uneven. I know. She searched his face, trying to find the line between sincerity and mistake. Then why did you... Because, he said quietly. I stopped remembering where the pretending ended. Her pulse stuttered. Ethan, I tried to keep it separate, he said, voice barely audible over the wind. I told myself it was just a role just one weekend. But every time you walk into a room, Clara, I forget. Her eyes glistened. You're my boss, she said, as if reminding both of them. He smiled sadly. Not right now. From the house, faint light spilled across the terrace. Somewhere behind the curtains, figures were visible, silhouettes watching from the dining room windows. Margaret Cole among them, Clara noticed, breath hitching. They're watching us? I know, Ethan said. Then why? Because for once, he said, eyes still locked on hers. I want the truth to be louder than the lie. Before she could respond, he kissed her again, this time slower, deeper, not defiant, not angry, but real. The whispers from the house grew, faint gasps carried by the wind. But out in the garden, all that existed was the pulse between their hands, the taste of rain in the air, and the terrifying, beautiful realization that neither of them were pretending anymore. When he finally pulled away, his voice was a rasp. Whatever happens next, you deserve to choose it. Clara's hands trembled as she stepped back, her mind spinning. I don't know what this is. He nodded once, then, don't name it yet. She turned toward the glowing house, toward the shadow of Margaret watching from the balcony, and then back at him. They're going to hate me for this. They already do, he said softly. So, let's make it worth it. For a long, fragile moment. The night held its breath, and then Clara, still trembling, took his hand. Inside, Margaret Cole's reflection glimmered against the glass as she watched them. Her expression was unreadable, but her voice was quiet, cold. So this, she murmured to herself, is how my son decides to destroy the family name. The wind outside carried laughter faint, nervous, real. And under the silver light of the garden, two people who had built a lie stood trembling in the truth of what it had become. The morning after the garden kiss, The sea was quiet. Windmere Estate stood still beneath a veil of fog, its white walls softened by mist. The world looked hushed, as if even the ocean had decided not to speak. Clara woke to that silence. It wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. The clock on the bedside table ticked in patient, merciless rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. She sat up slowly, the silk sheets too fine, too foreign against her skin. Last night flickered through her mind in fragments the sting of Margaret's words, Ethan's hand finding hers, the kiss that felt like a storm and a confession all at once, and then nothing. He had walked her back to the guest room, said softly, "Good night, Clara," and disappeared into the corridor. She hadn't seen him since. By noon, the house had shifted into motion, servants moving through halls, the clink of dishes, the faint murmur of conversation behind closed doors. Clara dressed quietly, folded her few belongings into her bag, and stepped into the corridor. Every portrait seemed to watch her as she walked toward the main hall, judgmental eyes painted centuries ago, now reflecting her shame. When she reached the foyer, a man in a gray suit was waiting, one of the Cole family staff. "Miss Benson," he said politely. "Mr. Cole asked me to deliver this." He held out an envelope cream-colored, sealed in wax. Her throat tightened. "Where is he?" The man hesitated. "Mr. Cole has left for Portland. Early flight." She blinked. "He left?" "Yes, ma'am. Said it was business." She took the envelope, her fingers trembling slightly. "Thank you," she managed. The man nodded, stepped back, and left her alone in the cavernous hall. For a long moment, she didn't move. Just the faint ticking of the grandfather clock filled the space steady. Final. Then she tore open the seal, inside a check, a number she didn't want to read, and beneath it, a folded note in Ethan's handwriting. "For your mother's care and the future you deserve. E.C. No apology, no explanation, just a tidy, quiet goodbye." Clara's breath hitched. The check trembled in her hand. It wasn't money, it was a verdict. A thank you for pretending. A severance pay for her heart. She folded it back into the envelope, pressing it against her chest as if that could make it mean something else. But it didn't. It was over. The drive back to Maple Creek was long and gray. Rain streaked the windshield, and every drop sounded like a thought she didn't want to have. When she reached home, the bistro lights glowed faintly through the mist. The familiar smell of roasted beans and baked bread wrapped around her like an old blanket. She wasn't sure she wanted any more. Inside, the cafe was half empty, a quiet afternoon lull. The coffee machine hissed softly, filling the air with a steady rhythm. Drip, pause, drip. Clara sat at her usual corner table, still wearing the same blue coat from the trip. She ordered nothing. She just sat and listened to the clock ticking above the counter, to the faint hum of the espresso grinder, to the ghost of his voice in her memory. "You don't have to prove your worth to anyone." She closed her eyes. "Except to you," she whispered, "because that's what hurt most. Not the kiss, not the humiliation, but the silence that came after. He had given her everything but his honesty. Days passed, no calls, no messages. The silence stretched so long, it became another presence in her apartment, a quiet shadow sitting across from her at breakfast, following her to work, waiting with her at night when the city lights flickered through the rain. Maggie came by one evening, her voice gentle. "You should cash the check. Clara, at least let something good come from it." Clara shook her head. "I can't. It's not charity," Maggie said softly. "He hurt you. Let him make it right." But Clara only stared at the envelope sitting on the counter untouched since the day she came home. "It's not right if it's bought," she said. "I didn't want his guilt. I wanted his truth." Maggie reached across the table, squeezed her hand. "Then maybe the truth is, he's a coward." Clara smiled faintly, bitterly. "Cowards don't kiss you like that, Mag. They just don't stay afterward. At night." She returned to her rituals, pouring water through the filter, watching coffee drip into the pot. The soft, rhythmic sound filled the silence. It became her metronome for remembering. Drip, the way his hand had steadied hers when she trembled. Drip, the look in his eyes before the kiss. Drip, the sound of his voice when he said her name like it meant something. She let the coffee overflow once, lost in thought. The dark liquid spilled across the counter, slow and deliberate like time refusing to hurry. The smell filled the room, rich and bitter. She whispered to the empty air, "I was never pretending. Ethan." Her voice cracked. "You were—" One evening, as the sky bruised into twilight, Clara sat by the window with her mother's old journal open on her lap. The pages smelled faintly of vanilla and dust. Inside, written in her mother's looping script, were the words, "Love isn't about being chosen. It's about being seen and staying." Clara traced the sentence with her fingertip, her throat tightening. He had seen her. That part she couldn't deny. But he hadn't stayed. Outside, a car passed, splashing through puddles. The sound faded into the distance. The clock on the wall ticked again, slow, patient, indifferent. Tick, tick, tick. She rose, walked to the kitchen, poured herself another cup of coffee. The steam curled upward, ghost-like, dissolving into air. For a moment, she imagined him there, sitting across from her again. Same cup in his hand, same quiet warmth between them. She closed her eyes and said, softly, "Goodbye." Late afternoon light spilled across the windows of the Silver Elm Bistro, golden and gentle, the kind of light that made everything look softer than it really was. Clara Benson was behind the counter, wiping down the espresso machine. The familiar hum, the steady drip of coffee, the faint jazz humming from the speakers, it all had the rhythm of something she'd built to keep herself from feeling too much. It had been 2 months since Winmere, 2 months since the kiss, 2 months since Ethan disappeared like he'd been a dream she'd talked herself into believing. She was almost good at pretending again. Almost. The door chimed. When she looked up, she froze. Adam Hayes stood there, her past, wrapped in an expensive coat and the same crooked smile that once made her forget who she was. "Clara," he said softly. "Hey." For a moment, her body forgot how to move. The sound of his voice was too familiar, too easy. "Adam," she said finally, her tone cautious. "What are you doing here?" He glanced around the bistro. "I was in town. Thought I'd stop by. You look good." She folded the cleaning cloth. "Buying time. Married life treating you well?" He hesitated, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. "That's actually what I wanted to talk about." She looked up sharply. Just hear me out. "Adam, I made a mistake," he said quietly. The words hung in the air like dust in sunlight. Clara felt her stomach twist. "You don't get to say that." "I know," he said quickly, "but I need to, because I can't stop thinking about what I walked away from. You were—" He stopped himself, exhaled hard. "You were real, Clara, and I traded that for something I thought I was supposed to want." She turned away, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for a cup. "Don't do this. I just want to talk," he said. "No expectations, just coffee." Her throat was tight. "Just coffee." The phrase carried too much history. After a long pause, she nodded toward an empty table. "Fine. 5 minutes." From the far corner of the room, hidden behind a newspaper and a cup of black coffee, Ethan Cole watched. He hadn't planned to be there. He told himself that much. But his car had somehow ended up parked across from the bistro, and his feet had found their way through the door like they had remembered what his heart had been trying to forget. Now, he sat in the shadows, pretending to read, every word blurring as he watched Clara sit down across from Adam. He saw the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, nervous, polite, the way she smiled out of courtesy. Not warmth, but the sight still burned. His jaw tightened. He shouldn't have come. He told himself he didn't have the right to feel this way, not after how he'd left. But seeing Adam lean forward, seeing the faint, familiar tilt of Clara's head as she listened, something dark and sharp twisted inside him. Jealousy had always been a stranger to Ethan, an emotion for men who lost control. But tonight, it felt like fire in his chest. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could guess. The apologies, the nostalgia, the soft voice of someone trying to rewrite regret. He saw Adam reach across the table, fingers brushing Clara's wrist, and that was when Ethan stood up. At the table. Clara pulled her hand back. "Don't," she said quietly. Adam blinked. "I'm sorry. I miss you." "Miss who?" "Adam," she asked. "The girl who waited for you to choose her. Or the woman you walked away from." He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. She sighed, looking away. "You didn't make a mistake. You made a decision. And I lived with it." He swallowed hard. "And if I told you I still..." Her phone buzzed, cutting him off. Clara frowned and reached for it. The screen flashed unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" A voice calm, steady, unmistakable came through the line. "Clara, it's Ethan." Her pulse stuttered. "Ethan?" Across the table. Adam's expression shifted. Ethan's voice was quiet, controlled, but there was an edge beneath it, urgency or something close to panic. "I'm sorry to call out of nowhere, but there's been an issue at the bistro's Portland office. They need you to confirm an order before closing. I already told them you'd handle it." Clara blinked. "What? That doesn't make sense. I'll explain later," he said quickly. "Just stay there until I get there. All right?" And then the line went dead. She stared at the phone, confused. "What was that?" "Everything okay?" Adam asked. Clara hesitated. Her instincts tugged in two directions, logic and something deeper, something that remembered the sound of Ethan's voice when it wasn't business. She stood. "I'm sorry. Adam, I need to check on something." "Now?" he asked, frustrated. "Yes." She forced a polite smile. "Thanks for the coffee." He rose, reaching for her arm. Clara. But she was already walking away. Outside, the evening light had begun to fade, spilling gold over the wet pavement. Clara stepped out onto the sidewalk, scanning the street, across the road. A car engine started. The headlights flicked on, and for a split second, she saw him, Ethan, sitting behind the wheel, phone still in his hand, eyes fixed on her. Their gazes met through the glass. He didn't move. Neither did she. Something in her chest cracked open, anger, relief, confusion, all tangled into one breathless heartbeat. He looked away first, starting the car, but she saw it, the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand gripped the steering wheel as if he were holding himself back. Then he drove off, disappearing into the rain-slick street. Clara stood there, the cool wind tugging at her hair, her pulse still racing. She should have been angry. She should have felt used. But instead, what she felt was worse, a strange, aching certainty that no matter how far Ethan tried to go, he was still orbiting her world. She whispered to the empty street, "You never really left, did you?" The traffic light changed from red to green. Somewhere in the distance, a car horn sounded sharp, brief, fading, and inside the silver elm, the last drops of coffee fell into a cup, 1, 2, 3, marking the rhythm of something that refused to end. The rain that night came in sheets, relentless, cold, cleansing. By the time Clara reached the restaurant, the streets of Portland shimmered under streetlights, every puddle reflecting a trembling piece of the city. The Silver Elm Bistro was closed. The chairs were stacked, the lights dimmed, the front door locked. But through the glass, she saw him, Ethan Cole, sitting alone at the corner table, the one he used to claim when the place was full of laughter and warmth. Now, it was just him and a half-empty glass of whiskey. Clara lifted her hand and knocked. Once. Twice. He looked up, startled. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he rose, walked toward the door, and unlocked it. Rain blew in with her as she stepped inside. dripping, trembling, furious. He spoke first. "Clara, what are you—" "You lied," she interrupted, her voice low, shaking. "You called the bistro. You made up some emergency just to stop me from leaving with Adam." His jaw tightened. "I don't deny it. He didn't. He couldn't." The silence that followed was confession enough. Clara took a step closer, her hair clinging to her face, rainwater trailing down her coat. "You don't get to vanish for months. Send me a check, and then pull strings to control where I go. I wasn't trying to control you," he said, his voice quiet. "I was trying to stop you from making a mistake." She laughed bitterly. "A mistake? You mean moving on?" His voice hardened. "With him. After everything he did to you." She glared at him. "At least he talked to me? At least he didn't disappear behind money and guilt." Ethan's composure cracked. "I was trying to protect you from what she shot back. From you." The echo of her words filled the room. Rain hammered against the windows, thunder rolling low in the distance. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "You think this is easy for me? You think I just walked away without tearing myself apart first?" "You walked away," she said, voice trembling. "You paid me to forget. That's not love. Ethan, that's cowardice." He looked up, then really looked at her, and for a moment, the man who stood before her wasn't the CEO or the polished host from Windermere. He was just a man stripped bare by his own fear. "I didn't know how to be what you deserved," he said, his voice breaking. "I thought if I gave you enough, you'd have the freedom you wanted." "What I wanted," she whispered, "was you. Not your money, not your empire, just you. But you never gave me that." He took a step closer, desperate now. "Clara!" "I don't," she said, tears mixing with rain on her cheeks. "Don't say it unless you mean it." The air between them was electric grief and longing tangled like storm clouds about to collide. Finally, Ethan's restraint shattered. His voice came out low, raw, shaking with emotion. "I fell in love with my fake wife," he said, "and I'm terrified she'll never forgive me." The words landed with the force of thunder. Clara froze, her breath catching. For a long time, she didn't move, didn't speak. The clock behind the bar ticked once, twice the sound deafening in the silence. "You love me," she said finally, her voice hollow, "and that's supposed to fix everything." He shook his head quickly. "No, it doesn't fix it, but it's the truth. The only truth I have left." She stepped back, crossing her arms tightly around herself. "The truth you couldn't tell me when it mattered." He flinched. "I was afraid. Of what she demanded, of what you'd see," he said, his voice breaking again. "Of you realizing I'm not the man you thought I was. I'm not kind or brave. Clara, I'm a man who's been taught to buy peace when I can't earn forgiveness." She stared at him, eyes red, jaw trembling, then shook her head slowly. "You can't buy forgiveness. Ethan, you can't buy love either." He took another step forward, voice cracking. "Then tell me what to do." She looked at him, and for the first time, there was no anger in her eyes, only exhaustion. "You still don't get it, do you?" He swallowed hard. "Try me." "Stop doing," she said quietly. "Just be, feel it, understand it. That's what I needed from you. Not money, not promises, just for you to be real." He stood there, silent, rain still dripping from her coat onto the floor between them. Finally, she exhaled shakily. "You want forgiveness?" "Yes." "Then prove it," she said. "Don't buy it, don't charm it, don't throw it into another grand gesture." Her voice softened, but every word carried steel. "You told me once that I didn't have to prove my worth to anyone. Now it's your turn. Prove that your heart isn't just another performance." He opened his mouth to speak, but she stopped him with a raised hand. "You have 24 hours, she said. He blinked. "For what?" "To be honest," she whispered, "with yourself, with me, with what you really want." Her hand brushed the doorknob, lingering there. Clara. She looked back at him one last time. Her eyes glistened, but her voice was steady. If you can't figure out what honesty looks like by then, I'll know your silence was the truth all along. And with that, she opened the door. Rain poured in again, wild, cold, unstoppable, washing over the floor as she stepped out into the storm. Ethan didn't follow. He just stood there, staring at the door as it swung shut behind her. The lock clicked soft, final, devastating. He sank into the nearest chair, his face buried in his hands. For the first time in his life, Ethan Cole, the man who controlled everything, realized he had no idea how to fix what he'd broken. All he had left was 24 hours, and a silence that demanded the one thing he'd never known how to give his truth. Morning came quietly after the storm. The world smelled of rain and second chances. Clara woke to the muted light of early dawn filtering through her window. For a moment, she lay still, listening to the soft creak of the floor, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint heartbeat of a city that never stopped moving. She thought of his face, the look in his eyes when she'd left him standing alone in the dark, the way his voice had cracked around the truth. 24 hours. She had meant every word, but she hadn't expected how long a single day could feel when the weight of love and disappointment sat quietly on her chest. By noon, she went to the bistro for her shift. The usual rhythm, the hiss of steam, the ring of mugs filled the space. But her heart wasn't in it. Near closing time, the door opened, and a courier stepped inside. "Miss Benson?" Clara blinked. "Yes." He handed her a thick envelope. "Delivery from Mr. Cole." She froze, her pulse leaping. "He sent this." The man nodded once and left. Her fingers shook as she opened it. Inside was no jewelry, no check, no bouquet of apologies, just a folded piece of paper and several neatly bound documents. The first page, a property deed. Her breath caught. Greenwich Street, Maple Creek. She flipped through business permits, architectural sketches, renovation plans, and then a single handwritten note in Ethan's familiar sharp, clean script. "I don't want to own your world. I just want to sit in it. E.C." Clara pressed her hand against her mouth. Tears came fast and hot. He hadn't tried to buy her back. He had built her dream the small cafe and bookstore she once described on a rainy night, when dreams were still safe to whisper. And he had done it without a contract, without a promise of her return. He had simply given. That evening, the sun broke through the clouds, painting the streets in gold. Clara didn't think. She ran. Her boots splashed through puddles as she raced toward downtown Maple Creek, heart pounding. When she reached the corner lot from the deed, she stopped short. There it was, the faint outline of a newly restored building, its windows still covered with paper. Through the glass, she could see workers inside, painting, arranging shelves. On the sign above the door, freshly hung, the words read, "Clara's Haven." Her knees nearly gave out. A voice behind her said softly, "You're supposed to see it tomorrow." She turned. Ethan stood a few steps away, hands in his coat pockets, looking as uncertain as she'd ever seen him. The sharpness was gone from him. He looked tired, human. She stared at him through her tears. "You did this." He nodded. "You once told me you wanted a place where people could feel at home. I thought maybe you deserved to have it." Clara swallowed hard. "You could have just told me you love me." "I already did," he said gently. "This time, I needed to show you." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "No strings, no strings," he said. "No ownership, no agenda, just belief. Yours, not mine." She looked past him to the storefront again, the warm cream paint, the hand-carved sign, the little lantern lights glowing softly even in the afternoon sun. It was everything she had imagined, simple, honest, hers. When she turned back to him, the tears were gone, replaced by something steadier. "You remembered everything." He smiled faintly. "Every word." The door to the shop creaked open. Dust and sunlight spilled across the floorboards. The scent of new wood mingled with coffee beans from the small roaster already humming inside. They stepped in together. The space was small, cozy, imperfect, beautiful, mismatched tables, bookshelves half-stocked, a counter ready for mugs and stories. Clara walked slowly, her fingertips grazing the edge of a wooden table. "You really did it. I had help," Ethan said softly. "Good architects. A few permits pulled by people who owe me favors." She turned to face him. "You used your power to give it away. Maybe that's the only power worth having," he said. The air between them softened. The hum of the city outside faded until there was only the sound of their breathing, the slow creak of the new floor, the warmth of late afternoon light. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Clara's eyes widened. "Ethan!" He opened it, not a diamond, but a simple ring with a single sapphire, the color of twilight after rain. He looked up at her, voice quiet, steady. "You once asked me not to buy your forgiveness. I'm not trying to. I'm asking for partnership." He took a breath. "Clara Benson, will you build this life with me, not as my employee, not as a name on paper, but as my equal?" Tears filled her eyes again. But this time, they came with laughter. "You know I don't sign contracts without reading the fine print." He smiled, the first real smile in months. "Then write your own terms." She took the box from his hand, set it down on the counter, and leaned in close. "Clause 1, she said softly. "We start every day with coffee." He grinned. "Non-negotiable. Clause 2, she continued. "No running away when it gets hard." He nodded, agreed. She looked up at him, her voice catching. "Clause 3, we don't pretend anymore." He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing her wrist. Not a single second. Then, as the golden light filled the shop and the faint melody of a street musician's guitar drifted through the open door, he whispered, "Clause 4. Clara smiled through her tears. "You ask me properly." Ethan's voice trembled, full of reverence. "Clara Benson, will you marry me?" She laughed, shaking her head as tears fell freely now. "Yes, you impossible man." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and their shop seemed to glow around them, alive with something bigger than either of them had dared to believe in. Outside, a breeze carried the scent of coffee and rain through the open windows. The street was quiet except for the hum of life beginning again. Clara leaned into him, her voice soft but sure. "Maybe we were always writing this story." Ethan kissed her forehead, and maybe it finally found its ending. She smiled, eyes closing as she whispered half to him, half to the space they'd built. Maybe the truest stories are the ones we never meant to write. Some stories don't just entertain us, they remind us who we are. Clara's journey isn't about wealth or romance. It's about dignity, forgiveness, and the quiet courage to start again. She teaches us that love isn't measured by what someone gives you, but by what they're willing to understand about you. Ethan's redemption reminds us that power means nothing without humility. Sometimes, the greatest proof of love is not possession, but letting another person stand on their own feet stronger, freer, and unafraid. In the end, Clara's Haven isn't just a cafe. It's a symbol of healing, of choosing kindness over pride, and of finding peace in being seen for who we truly are. For anyone who's ever been overlooked, misunderstood, or made to feel small, Clara's story whispers a simple truth. You don't need to prove your worth to the world. You just need to live it quietly, consistently, and with grace. And maybe, when we stop pretending and start understanding, we'll find that love in all its imperfect honesty still has the power to make the world gentle again. Thank you, dear friends, for staying with us through Clara and Ethan's journey, a story of second chances, quiet strength, and the courage to be real. If this story touched your heart, made you think, or simply reminded you of the beauty in ordinary people, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing heartfelt stories that speak to the soul, stories about dignity, love, and the simple grace of being human. Until next time, this is Shining Stories, where every heart has a story worth hearing.